Hey everyone, Mark Meckler here, and I can't be with you live tonight, but I have something that's probably even better, which is Rick Green and I were recently on tour in Montana, and we were on a very special tour. We called it the Full Tank Tour. You might have noticed the logo before the video here. And we're in Montana to talk about restoring America. We called it the Full Tank Tour. Well, honestly, just to remind us not to run out of gas like we did last time. But we had a great time. We went to Hamilton. We went to Kalispell, Montana. We did some public presentations. I was there live. Rick was there live. We had a great time. A lot of people joined us. If you weren't there, I'm sorry you missed it live, but you're going to get a chance to enjoy that video with me right now. You ready to roll?
Yeah.
What are we going to talk about? True story. We're standing at the back of the room, and I said to Rick, so what are we going to talk about tonight? And he started laughing. I started laughing. It's like, man, you're going to screw it all up. Don't talk about what we're going to talk about.
We've never planned ahead.
No. If we did, our wives wouldn't recognize us. There's a true story. We did run out of gas in Broadus, right? Which apparently is the heart of John Birch Society country. And so this is a dangerous place for a couple of guys from Texas to run out of gas. The true story is that it's Rick's fault that we ran out of gas. He has a different version. It's true. Anyway, we did run out of gas. And so when it happened, he thought I was joking around. The car starts jerking and shaking, and he had noticed the red light come on, which I was not paying attention to. I'll take credit for that. Because we were just having too much fun, and we were there. Is like when you're in this state or you're in Wyoming, like that's actually where the middle of nowhere is. I realize it's a real place, and so we're out there in the middle of nowhere, just us and the cows, and it's a gray sky, and it's starting to sleet, and the car starts shaking. It's kind of a fancy new 4Runner, I think it was, right? And so he goes, "Oh, stop joking around." I'm like, "I'm not joking around. We're definitely out of gas." So we pull over. In the middle of nowhere, just us and the cows and the grass and the big sky, and like, okay, what do we do now? And Rick goes, I know. And he pulls out his phone. Go, what are you doing? He goes, I'll just call an Uber. Like, that's a city slicker, right? The cows do not drive Ubers. To his credit, though, he figured out how to get us rescued. Thank God we had a cell signal, because I understand near Broadus, there's not a lot of cell signal out there. We did have a cell signal. Because I was thinking how unfortunate it would be for Rick to have to walk like 8 or 9 miles. and so he is smart enough to look on a map, and he finds about 8 miles away, I think, was an RV park, right?
Yeah, well, something like, it was like RV park, trailer park, some kind of a housing thing, yeah.
Yeah, so Rick picks up the phone and calls this RV park. I'll let you take the story from there, because you're the one who talked to him.
I just said if you happen to hear about a couple of idiots run out of gas in the middle of nowhere, that would be us, and we need help. Is there any chance anybody there would bring some gas to us 8 miles away? We'd be glad to pay, whatever. And this lady on the phone hollers out, "Mama Tracy, would you take these people a jar of gas?" I said, "I've never heard of a jar of gas." But anyway, so she did, and so Tracy was very nice. She got there. And she asked us.
Well, wait, but I got to paint the picture for you, because she shows up, and she's exactly what you would expect to see out of a backcountry Wyoming woman.
Looked like a Texas woman.
Yeah, she did, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, she was tough as nails. Pulls up in a big old pickup truck. She's wearing a big flannel jacket and not a cowboy, had a baseball cap. Yeah, she looked like I would not cross Mama Tracy.
Right. Yeah. And so she takes me back to the back of her truck to get the gas can, and she says, "Well, what are you boys doing out here?" And I said, "Well, my friend and I, we teach on the Constitution, and we're out here teaching on the Constitution." And she said, "Y'all aren't those Convention of States people, are you?" and no. First she said, "Do you know so and so and so and so?" She named some people. She said, "Oh, I'm in the Constitution. You know so and so and so." I didn't recognize the names. Mark knew them as soon as I said them to him. And anyway, turns out she was definitely not for Convention of States. And so
she says, you boys wouldn't be those guys wanting to change the
Constitution. Yeah, that was it. You boys wouldn't be those guys trying to change the Constitution. That's what it was. And so then I'm like, very quickly, I said, no, we're trying to uphold the Constitution and restore the Constitution and get some of the old clauses that have been manipulated put back in. And anyway, so I grabbed the gas can, start moving towards the car as quick as I can. And Mark starts talking to her, and I'm like, get the gas into the car as quick as possible. He's talking to her, and I'm trying to get the gas in because I know she's about to say, "No way, y'all are getting any of my gas." So we get out of there very quickly. But it was God's grace that Mark Meckler and Rick Green were out here campaigning for convention of states and rescued by John Bertram.
Rescued by our enemies. Praise the Lord, right? You never know. You never know. Deanna heard that we were stranded without gas and brought us, and she went, oh, good Lord, not brought us. So we made it, and we had a great time. We always have a great time when we're on the road. And we're always talking. I mean, the thing is, when Rick and I are in the car together, we have a good time. We're talking about how to save the country is usually what we're doing. And he's usually scheming Patriot Academy, and I'm scheming Convention of States. Those things often intersect. And so when we get together, one of the things that happens is we always come up with a new scheme. And the problem is our wives are not there to tamp us down. It's not really a problem for us, but they don't like it very much. In fact, I noticed that there was a flyer going around that was describing this particular tour, and the word unsupervised was on the flyer. Unhinged and unsupervised. So we'll let you guys decide for yourselves, but we're definitely unsupervised. They're not here. There's nothing they can do. So I want to start by talking about what's going on in Washington, D.C. right now, because I think, and that's why Rick and I do what we do, it's because they do what they do in Washington, D.C. Now, I don't know if you guys have been paying attention, but apparently polling says that 87% of the American public wants the SAVE Act, right? You guys have seen that polling? Yeah, that's a big number. Like 87% can't agree on anything, can't agree on what to have for dinner, but they all agree that we ought to have voter ID for voting in elections.
And only legal citizens.
Only legal citizens. Anybody disagree with that? Raise your hand if you disagree with that. Okay, that's good. The bouncers were in the back. They were coming for you if you disagreed with that. So 87% of American people believe that we should have voter ID and only citizens vote in elections. Seems like common sense. And thank God we have such great leadership in the United States Senate because they're just getting that done. Right. What's going on? Like, this is one I really don't even understand. I feel like I understand most of what goes on in DC, what the motivation is on this stuff. I just can't understand this. You know, here's another one. I don't know about you. I voted for Donald Trump because I wanted to see mass deportations because I know that there's millions upon millions, 10 to 20 million illegal aliens poured into this country during the administration of Joe Biden. They need to go home, right? Am I wrong about that? They need to go home. And so that's what we voted for. That's what the president said he was going to do. And so it's really extraordinary because all the Republicans in Congress are in support of that, right? What is this deal now? What do they call it? The Dignidad Act? Yeah, so they're going to make them all citizens or so like they can all, I don't even know what it is.
They're actually claiming it's not a path to citizenship, but it's amnesty.
Just let them all stay in the country, right? Ronald Reagan said the greatest mistake of his presidency was amnesty. Like he got bamboozled. So now we got Republicans trying to do that to us again. The reason I bring up those stories isn't to make you feel bad. It should make you feel bad. That's not why I bring them up. I bring them up so that you understand why we're doing what we're doing. Washington, D.C. is broken. It will not, never, ever, as long as this country exists, never fix itself. It's not human nature. The system is working perfectly for the people in Washington, D.C. They're doing quite well. They're getting paid well. They drive around in black cars. They eat at fancy restaurants. They got big staffs. Everybody treats them with respect. For a lot of these folks in D.C., it's the best job they've ever had. The lobbyists are making millions, hundreds of millions, billions of dollars, ultimately billions of dollars spent on lobbying every year. It's working pretty well for them. The big companies that have a big presence in Washington, D.C. that can lobby for the right regulations that price out the small guys, that price out their competitors, that make it impossible for consumers to get good insurance rates and have medical transparency, simple things, right? All these big chemical companies, they're driving what goes on in Congress. They're getting exactly what they want. We're not getting what we want. And they're never going to give us what we want, ever. The main thing that I want for you, for all of us, for my kids, for his kids, we got a bunch of grandkids running around between us now. I want them to be in control. I want them to be sovereign citizens. I want them to have the power that the Constitution originally granted to them that's now been stolen by Washington, D.C. And so my obligation is to fight to give them that power back. Because if it doesn't tell you right now by looking at D.C. that they're never going to fix themselves, I don't know what will tell you. The $38 trillion in debt. You know how much $1 trillion is? Me either. I don't know. Like I can't count that high. Like nobody knows how much. I'm old enough to remember when nobody even knew the word trillion. Like I remember when the deficit was hundreds of billions, and that was horrifying. And now it's trillions of dollars. It was $14 trillion, I believe, when we started this effort. Now it's $38 trillion. They're never going to fix that. So the question is, if we all think that that's bad, if we all believe that that's not good for the country, it's not good for the citizens, it's not good for you guys, for sure. By the way, we're at the point now where the interest on our national debt is about to exceed the amount of money that we spend on national defense. You know how many countries have survived that? 0. Never in human history. When you're spending more money to finance your debt than you can spend to defend your country, you're out of business. And so we're at a danger point, and I want to do something to fix that. We get a lot of people who tell us, oh, you can't do this, it's too scary. Well, what should we do? Oh, well, we just need to pray. Yes, more, every day, emphatically, all day long. We should always invoke the name of the Lord. However much we do it, we should do it more. So I agree with that. Some people say, we just need to elect better people. How's that working for us? I feel like right now we have the best administration I've ever seen in my life. I'm 64 years old. My first vote was for Ronald Reagan. How's it working for us? Are you watching the national deficit decrease? Are you watching the debt? Are we paying down the debt? Are you guys getting more power back? Do you feel more free? Look, praise God for Donald Trump, and I mean that in all sincerity. I can't even imagine how bad off we would be if he were not president right now. But he's just a tiny stopgap measure against the tidal wave of the federal government.
Everything he's doing is temporary.
Virtually, yeah, everything is like, imagine this. How much stuff did he do by executive order? It was cool, wasn't it? Like a tsunami of executive orders, and things got better. The wall and the border closed in 5 minutes. Remember, we got to have legislation or we can't. That's not exactly how Joe Biden talks. It's more like the border and I don't know, legislation. And anyway, Trump doesn't. Yeah, whisper it. Trump did it in 5 minutes. And so thank God for President Trump, but it's temporary. The next time we have the next Joe Biden, God forbid, Kamala Harris, God forbid, Gavin Newsom, God forbid. Could have been Eric Swalwell, but somehow we escaped that one. I mean, who knows who it's going to be, but the parade of horribles is truly horrible. So we got to do something. We can't count on them to fix it for us. I think one of the themes for me about America is a do-it-yourself nation. We are the only do-it-yourself nation in the world, literally. And what I mean by that is we've always done it ourselves. Like we come to this new continent, we're like, oh, this is pretty scary here. We'll just carve some farms out of the land, and then we'll start to build some cities, and then we'll move westward, and ultimately we'll conquer the whole continent. And once we've done that, wow, we ran out of room. Let's go to the moon, right? Let's go to space. And I thank God for Elon. We're doing that again. But this idea that we can do these things is uniquely American. If you've traveled all over the world, I've traveled all over the world, it's just not like this anywhere else. I'll give you a really simple example. I've traveled a whole bunch in Asia, Japan real specifically. And in Japan, I would go out to dinner with friends, American friends, and we'd go out to dinner, and the restaurants are real small, and we would have a big party, like 8 people, and all the tables are little tiny 4-seater tables. And if you walk into a Japanese restaurant and you see 2 tables sitting next to each other, and you got 8 people, and you move those tables together, like the world comes to an end. Like, what are you doing? What are you doing? Well, look, there's 8 of us. We're pushing the tables together. We did that tonight at the restaurant, right? Well, you can't do that. You can't do that. You got to ask the boss. Like, we got to ask the boss if we can, like, what do you mean? There's 8 of us. We need 2 tables. It's not how it works in the rest of the world. As Americans, we see a problem, we fix it. That's just what we do. Like, we've always done that. This is what we do with our churches, right? In the church, you got a problem in your community. What do? You get your church together and you go out and fix it. You don't ask the government to go fix it. You go fix it yourself. This is a DIY culture. No other country is like this. This is totally unique in the world. What we're doing with Article 5 is DIY. Fix it yourself. Federal government's broken. Framers said, we're a DIY nation. We've got to make sure there's a part of that toolkit that allows us to fix the federal government ourselves when it's broken. And that's why they put Article 5 in there. We'll talk a little bit later about the history of Article 5 and how it all got in there. But that's why we're doing this, because the country's broken, because I got kids. I got my first granddaughter right now. I got 2 more on the way here in the next few months. I got to do something. And if we're not going to do this, I'm going to be frank with you guys, I don't know what we're going to do. Prayer for sure, but other than that, I don't know how we fix the country without taking power away from Washington, D.C.
Yeah, it reminds me of a video I just saw a couple of weeks ago on my feed of the 3rd greatest Supreme Court justice of my lifetime, Antonin Scalia. Thomas is the best in history. I think Alito's 2nd best in history, and Scalia 3rd. Anyway, it was a speech he was given, and as we're saying that, I just started thinking about it. He basically describes what he believes really made America last as long as it has and continue to be successful. And, we're going to celebrate the 250th this year. We want to make America great again. We got to know what made her great in the first place. We want to see another 250 years. We got to figure out what worked in the first place. And what he described, this was probably 20 years ago when he gave this speech, he talked about separation of powers and checks and balances. And he talked about the ability to be good stewards by holding others accountable and having others hold us accountable. And it hit me that what good is a check if you're not using the check to balance things out? If you're not actually checking the bad behavior, if say you're the president, Congress is passing bad bills and you just let them all go into law, and you're not checking that power with your veto. If the court starts legislating like it has for the last 80 years and making law, if you're the president and Congress and you don't rein them in, you don't impeach bad judges, you don't do all the things necessary to rein in the court, the check is not balancing things out, so we get out of balance like we have. Well, ultimately, the states are the check on the balance between the feds and the states are not checking that out-of-control federal government, and it's allowed it to get completely out of control. And in my mind, it's a stewardship issue. This is literally about accountability and being good stewards. I was thinking as we were driving over here, it'd be kind of like being on a board of directors of a company, and the executive team of the company, the president, the CEO, the CFO, they're all out of control. They're robbing the stockholders blind by paying themselves too much money, by doing things the company was never intended to do, cheating, doing whatever. They're completely out of control. The board of directors is supposed to be the ones to hold them accountable. The stockholders sent the board there to do that. And the board is well aware of everything the executive team is doing. And they say, well, we need to call a meeting and we need to fire some of these people and we need to put some checks and balances on them. But if we do that, then some of the other board members might do it and do some different things that we don't want to do. It'd be like literally saying we're not going to use our power as the board of directors to check and balance this out of control executive team of the company, but we're not going to do it because we're afraid something might go wrong, or we're afraid some other members of the board might try to do some things that we don't agree with. Does that sound familiar? It's the same. Look, churches. If you're on the deacon board and your pastor and the pastoral team is out of control and they're wasting the church's money and they're maybe even stealing from the church and they're doing all kinds of things that are outside the purview of the church and outside the responsibility of the church, and as the deacon board, you say, well, we really should call a meeting and rein this thing in, but something bad might happen if we have a meeting. Somebody might serve some coffee we don't like. Whatever the worst thing is you can think of, we're afraid that might happen, so we're just going to let the evil continue. Is that good stewardship? No. I think it's actually a dereliction of duty. Let me just be real blunt since we're in a church. I think it's the parable of the talents, and it's the wicked and slothful servant. that refused to do what they were commanded by the master to do. And to be very, very blunt, our state legislatures were commanded by the master of the people, meaning we the people in our Constitution. We gave the state legislatures the responsibility and the power to check the balance between the feds and the states, and they have refused to call the meeting. They have refused to simply get together and talk about what they need to do to rein in the federal government. So I don't know if that analogy works, that makes any sense to y'all, but that's what I was thinking about. I was coming over here, I was just thinking, man, wouldn't you, if you were the stockholder, wouldn't you be pretty hacked off at not just the president and the CEO and the CFO that are stealing the money? Wouldn't you be pretty hacked off at the board members that had the power to stop them and refuse to do it until the company goes bankrupt and you as the stockholder lose everything? That's what's happening to us as citizens. We, the citizens, are the stockholders. The state legislatures are the board members, and we need the state legislatures to step up and do their job and put the president, the CFO, and everybody else back in their place. Essentially put the entire federal government. Yes, the president, because like Mark said, it's not going to be Trump forever. And, you know, Trump might think it's going to be him forever, but
we can pray.
Yeah. But it's going to, you know, so it's not the people, it's the institutions that need to be put back in their place, the institutions themselves. I'm so sick of these speeches about the institution of the Senate. We have to protect the integrity of the institution of the Senate. No, you don't. You need to protect the Constitution. It's not the institution of the Senate that's at stake here. It's the nation that's at stake here. And by the way, the zombie filibuster is not an original part of the Senate as it is. And it certainly shouldn't be the part of any nation that believes in majority rule. We're allowing a minority in the Senate to control our country right now. And David Barton and I don't know, Mark and I didn't talk about this prior to the Republicans being in charge. We have always been intellectually honest about this. Whether Republicans were in charge or Democrats, we have always said the way they're doing the filibuster, this zombie filibuster, where you don't actually have to get up and talk, where they're letting 41 senators call the shots, which is a minority, not a majority, is wrong. We should not be ruled by a minority. And everybody, oh yeah, but then when the Democrats are in charge, well, wish we'd had it. It cuts both ways. Elections have consequences. But the worst thing you can do is have a minority in control, which prevents you from doing things like the SAVE Act. I completely agree with Mark. We're not going to get the SAVE Act. You're not going to get, we're not going to, by the way, the Supreme Court's probably about to uphold birthright citizenship. So we're going to continue to allow Chinese billionaires to impregnate 100 women and send them over to the United States to have those children, and then those children become American citizens. And cartels and everybody else that's taking advantage of this, you're going to continue to have the Somali daycare, you're going to continue to have all this stuff, because instead of asking the question, not the question, oh, who's allowing that money to go to these Somali daycares, we'll do a better job of managing that. No, we should be saying, what in the world is the federal government doing involved in daycare in the first place? There is no constitutional authority for that whatsoever. Those kind of questions and actually checking that balance, just like Mark said, is never going to happen in Washington, D.C. Too many people are on the payroll. Too many people are getting rich on this thing. It's got to come from the states. It's got to come from us. And my goodness, if not now, when?
Yeah, and if not us, then who, right? Pastor Kirby said something really important to open this. You were talking about who's sovereign. Like, this is a really interesting thing, constitutionally and biblically. When I became a Christian late in life, I'm a slow learner. I was 51 years old when I accepted the Lord. And
yeah, when I tell jokes, Mark, I look over at Mark when we're driving down the road and I go, oh, I need to slow down and tell
Actually, that's a brutal criticism, but it is fair. But one of the things that happened the first time I read through the Bible, I'm a very critical reader. I'm a lawyer by training, so I read things closely. First time through the Bible, I'm like really trying to understand. And I get to Romans 8, and I remember reading Romans 8 saying that we're supposed to obey the governing authorities, right? And I just thought, oh, heck no. I don't like that. That's terrible. Like, I think the governing authorities in this country are corrupt and terrible, and I'm just supposed to obey them. And I was really frustrated by that. And I had a very good mentor at the time, one of the guys that led me to Christ. And so I called him up. I'm like, Tim, like, I don't like this. Like, and he said, by the way, it's not a cafeteria. You don't get to choose, right? It's in the scripture. So just deal with it. But let's talk about what that really means. I said, okay, well, and he said, what do you think it means? I says, well, we obey the governing authorities, because who are the governing authorities in America? And I said, well, I don't know. The president, Congress, the Supreme Court, maybe? And he goes, nope, that's wrong. Okay, who? And Tim was a very good mentor. He's like, I'm not going to tell you, go home and think about it, and we can talk about that later. Very frustrating, but I do learn better that way. And so I thought about it, and what the pastor said earlier is the truth, which is we live in this really unique country where we, the people, are actually the governing authority. And that's what I realized. I went back, I'm thinking, man, what am I missing? And I'm like, we, the people, it's us. We're in charge. And so what does that mean? And so I went back to talk to my friend Tim about it, got on the phone. We're having another biblical conversation, talking theology, which I love doing. And he said, okay, so what do you think that means? Like, now we're in charge, right? And I said, it means those people in DC are in big trouble with the Lord. And he goes, what do you mean by that? I said, they're not obeying the governing authorities. Like, we're the governing authority and they're not obeying us. And he said, so you think they're the ones in trouble? And I said, yeah. And he goes, but who's the governing authority? And I said, we are. And he said, so what does that mean if you're the governing authority? I said, it means we're in charge. And he goes, yeah. And he goes, so if they're not doing what you think they should do, and you're not forcing them to govern righteously and biblically and do what's right for the people, and you have the power to force that. You have the power of the vote. And I was involved in this movement. And you have Article 5, you can force them to, and you're not forcing them to do that stuff. Who's in trouble? And I went, oh, dang, we're in trouble. It's on us. Like, this is the bottom line. We're a do-it-yourself nation. And if we don't fix it, the only people to blame, us in this room, broadly speaking. It's not up to Congress to fix it. It's not up to Donald Trump to fix it. It's not going to get fixed because we all complain a whole bunch about it and point our fingers at those bad people in Washington, D.C. We have to fix it. That's the amazing thing about this system of governance. It was set up to give us the tools so that we can fix it. You know, the way this clause of Article 5 gets into the Constitution tells us a lot. So I think the most important day in American history is September 15th. Anybody know why? It's my wife's birthday, so I didn't expect you would know that. Trick question. And it's also, well, tell me why. 17th, 15th. Now you're very close. 15th is 2 days before Constitution Day. 17th is the day they all say, okay, we agree. And the ones who sign the Constitution. Very important day in American history. 2 days before that, Colonel George Mason stands up to address the men assembled. Now, Mason, well, from Virginia, he spoke the third most at convention, according to David Barton. And so I imagine when he stands up to address the convention, and it's 2 days before the end of convention, I imagine that they don't all just go, oh, awesome, we're going to hear from Colonel Mason. They're like, oh, seriously, not this guy again. We're done, George. Like, what do you got? And he goes, we have a serious problem with this Constitution we've drafted. We gave the power to the federal government, to Congress, to propose amendments, but we didn't give that same power to the people acting through the states. And then he asked the question, are we so naive that we believe that a federal government that becomes a tyranny would propose amendments to restrain its own tyranny? Like, I think that's a forehead slap moment. I wish we had video because I bet they laughed. Literally, remember, they had just come from tyranny. Like, they understood what an overbearing government looked like. So I think they probably all laughed. Now, we don't have videotape, but we do have Madison's notes. His notes at that point say something very simple. 2 Latin abbreviations, says nin com, which means no comment or no debate. Now, this is extraordinary. They debated everything. They debated how to debate. They debated whether they should pray. They debated what denomination would be allowed to lead them. And like, everything got debated. But there, all it says is nin com. And then Eldridge Gary stands up and he proposes a method to give the states the power to call a convention of states to propose amendments. Specifically, why? To restrain a federal government that's out of control. He knows that we have to give the power to you, to the states, to the people of the states, to the state legislatures to restrain an out of control federal government. They vote on it. Unbelievably, the only thing with no debate and unanimously adopted as part of the United States Constitution on September 15th, 1787. They told us what was going to happen, and they opened a drawer in the toolkit and they put a tool in there for us to use it. Y'all have toolkits at home. Can you imagine if you got up one morning and there's water leaking out from your sink, and you go to your sink and you look at it, you're like, that definitely needs a Phillips head screwdriver. And you go, I got one of those in your garage. And your wife goes, well, get out there and get it. Well, that's how it works in my house anyway. And you go, you know what? I don't know. It's a little scary in the toolkit. I'm afraid I might pull out the wrong screwdriver. I mean, what if I pull out a slot screw? What if I pull out one of those funky new star head screwdrivers? I don't know what's going to happen. Like, stuff might happen if I go out to that toolkit. And my wife's going to be like, get your butt outside and get that and fix it. They gave us the tool. And I think that that's what the framers, if they're looking at us right now, if they're up there in heaven and they're looking down at us, they're like, we gave you guys the tool. What's the problem? And so I think we got to use it. I don't think we have a choice. We got the tool. They gave us the tool. The time is now. It's come. We got to use that tool. Rick, would you do me a favor? Would you explain how the whole thing works for folks who might not be familiar with that?
Honestly, at this point in what we've described, I was against it. I thought, well, yeah, you need that tool, but what if the neighbor uses that tool to stab me? What if somebody else has the votes at the convention and they change my constitution? And I'm a Texan. I'm a former legislator. I passed a bill to stop cities from gun manufacturers. So I was called the God and Guns guy in the Texas House. So
yes,
so much so that the great Charlton Heston actually did a spot for me one time. Did a commercial for me. Actually said, "Rick Green's a patriot you can trust. Join me in supporting Rick Green. We don't need more politicians. We need more patriots," because he was head of the NRA. And so I'm a gun guy, okay? And I always thought they might change the Second Amendment. They might get some of these crazy, they call them high capacity magazines. We call them normal capacity magazines. But so some of these crazy laws, to outlaw. So I was worried and honestly operating out of a spirit of fear of what could happen. And I genuinely at the time did not understand the brilliance and design of the founding fathers, knowing that, of course, there's always going to be attempts to take things over or to take things in the wrong directions. But if that's your attitude, then don't have elections, because the other side might win. Don't have a legislature, because the other side might pass a law. Don't have a government, because the other side might use that. I mean, that's the same logic as saying states don't correct the federal government because you might lose. I mean, it's just crazy. But what changed my mind was part of how it actually works. So once I understood the process, I realized, wow, even if you had a runaway convention, we always hear that, even if you had an out-of-control convention, which there's a dozen reasons why I can tell you that would not happen, but even if that did happen, even if all of the worst-case scenarios, even if everything you can possibly imagine that would be bad that happened at the convention, even if all of that happened, which I think there's virtually zero chance that happens, but even if it did, it still has to go back to all 50 states. And 38 of those states have to rubber stamp the legislators that disobeyed them. 38 state legislative bodies have to say, yeah, it's okay that you did exactly what we told you not to. We'll go ahead and support you in it. And so you only need to stop a bad amendment from actually getting into the Constitution. You only need 13 legislative bodies, not 13 states, 13 legislative bodies. So if your Senate here in Montana says no, that's one. If the House in Texas says no, that's two. Because now Texas is a no. There's no way to get it done without both chambers. So I could throw a rock from my house to 13 states that would say no to any amendment that does anything to hurt the Second Amendment. I can promise you that. That's a no-brainer. But I didn't understand that third big step. So now backing up, the steps are that 34 states have to basically call each other and say, we're going to have a meeting. And the way you make the call is your legislature passes a resolution saying, we want to have a meeting with the other state legislators or other states from across the nation. And when 34 states say, we want to have a meeting, then the meeting's going to take place. And federal Congress has nothing to do with this whole thing other than once there's 34 identical applications or calls, then they set the date. Now that's, some people think they can manipulate that. I don't see how. I think that's not a big deal. So then you have the meeting. I believe the meeting will last for months. I think it's going to be the best constitutional lesson the country's ever had. Every media outlet's going to be covering it. We're all going to be watching it in real time online. There's no way to cheat. There's no ballots. There's no computer voting. There's no way to cheat. So for anybody that's been concerned about election integrity, this is the only way to guarantee that there's no cheating and we have an actual vote of each state happening at the convention, and we get to watch them debate it. We get to watch them, figure out the wording on the amendments, and it will be very meticulous. It will take time, but once they get an amendment that 26 of the 50 states minimum agree to, then that amendment is proposed in the same way that Congress proposes amendments, and that proposal goes back to all 50 states. 38 have to say.
But Rick, that's where it's really scary. Right?
Have a meeting?
Well, no, it's not the meeting. It's that people will make suggestions.
Suggestions?
Yeah, exactly.
Will they actually talk to each other?
Yeah, and in the end, they will suggest something. And you know what happens when people suggest things like
And listen, we've been to conventions, like party conventions, let's say.
We were talking about that earlier tonight. Yeah.
It can get crazy, and it can get out of, like you feel like it's out of control. At the end of the day, ultimately, the final result is not, but in the middle of it, it's chaotic. At this, though, you're only talking 50 states they can send as many as they want. Some of them may send 3, some may send 5, some may send 10, but they only get 1 vote each. And so they kind of caucus together and decide what their 1 vote's going to be. So it's actually very professional. It's very unlike those party conventions. And it's actually one of the best, when you look back at the conventions that have taken place in America's history, it's one of the most intellectual moments in time, because you're bringing together, even though you may say, well, our state might send some of the not so intellectual people. I promise you, there's something about getting in that environment when you start having those discussions that the best actually comes out. People start rising to the occasion of having to draw on their best experiences, their best reading, their best, things that they've learned, and they're going to have resources of experts at their fingertips like never before. I just think it's going to be remarkable. I think just watching it is going to be amazing to see the debates. Well, we've seen it in the simulations. When we've done simulations, even though it's not an actual convention of states that's under the Constitution taking place, it is a convention of legislators coming together from across the country. And I mean, it's amazing. And sure, there's moments where emotions get high. You're talking about amending the Constitution, and they may not get along for a few minutes, and there may be even times when they break and say, we got to go to lunch, just like at the original convention. That's okay. That's part of human nature. That's part of the process. But man, they've made us so proud in the way that they come together and end up ultimately, and that's just in 48 hours. So that's not how a real convention would take place. They'd have a lot more time to work through the nuance and the words. But just remember the 3 steps. Number 1, the 34 states have to call for it.
Which means they all have to agree in advance what they're going to talk about. Like if one state says we want to talk about these 5 things and another state says no, these 2 things, those don't aggregate. In other words, those are not calls to the same convention.
If they did, we would already have a convention, because there were different states calling for different things throughout our history, and you could aggregate those.
So you get 34, which is a super majority, that have all agreed in advance what the limitations are at convention. Each state chooses their own delegation. By the way, this is interesting. 20 states have now passed the Convention of States application. 16 of them now have passed delegate selection acts, which they already know how they're going to select their delegates, how they're going to control their delegates, how they're going to communicate with their delegates. I found that really interesting. They wouldn't do that unless they were sure that the convention was imminent, right? They got a lot of stuff to do when the legislature is in session. They're not just willy-nilly passing bills because they feel like it. They know convention is coming, and so they're getting prepared.
Which should be hopeful to everybody in the room. Right? A lot of times we see these big things. I like the way Mark says, I've kind of adopted this. This is the most muscular act in a constitution, in a constitutional republic. This is the most difficult thing to do in our system of government. You got all these different checks and balances, all these different levels of government. And this check and balance that is more, vertical, not horizontal. So we think of checks and balances as president, Congress, legislative, across this way horizontally. This is a check and balance that's vertical. And so it's meant to be the hardest thing to do, because it's the ultimate document that is governing the nation. We want it to be incredibly difficult, but it absolutely can be done. We are on our way. And like you said, people are starting to realize this is going to happen. And honestly, I think the closer we get, we're at 20 right now, you watch when we get to 28, 29, 30 states, you're going to see Congress starting to go, maybe we need to straighten up our act. And I bet you're going to see them start to propose some things that we're talking about proposing at a convention, because they're going to try to head it off at the pass. They're going to be like, ooh, if they have a convention, the states really are going to rein us in, and they'll actually strip power from us. We could at least kind of just trim a little bit, and maybe they'll lose some steam. You watch, that's going to happen. We're not going to lose steam, and I don't think the movement will, but they will attempt to do that.
So so when they get to convention, all the delegations come. They elect their own president at convention. Who's going to run the convention? George Washington was the president of the 1787 convention. So people say, oh my God, we don't know who the president's going to be. 34 states are the supermajority that decided what the convention's about. They're going to select somebody who you and I would trust to run that convention because they're going to do it along the lines of the resolution which has been passed. By the way, that resolution, if you don't know, it calls for a discussion of only three things. One is term limits, not just for Congress, but for all federal officials, like staffers and bureaucrats, you know, the deep state, right? That's the big problem. So we need to not just term limit Congress. Actually, I think term limits on Congress alone is bad and dangerous because it empowers staffers and bureaucrats. So our resolution allows for term limits across the board, including, and I think this one's important, federal judges.
I was just about to ask you that. The way it's worded, we can do that.
Absolutely, federal judges. And by the way, there's studies that have been done, Rick, on federal judges sitting on the federal bench. The longer they're on the bench, the more likely they are to rule in favor of big government. And it's not because they're evil, it's because their job is to work in big government. If they want a bigger staff, they need a bigger government. If they want to get paid more, that's a bigger government, right? If they want more prestige, that's a bigger government. And so we need to limit their terms. When it said, by the way, it doesn't say in the Constitution that judges serve for life. This is a confusion that people have. You ever heard that? Judges have life terms, it's not true. That's not in the Constitution. You know what it says in the Constitution? On good behavior. That's what do you know what was considered bad behavior at the time of the Constitution that could get somebody, a judge, removed from office? Swearing in public. Like they had a little bit different standards back then.
Drunken court.
Yeah, drunken court. So all this stuff, like they expected that judges would have perfect decorum, would behave themselves perfectly publicly. It was not meant to be a life tenure as we think of it. In fact, back then, by the way, at the time of the creation of the Supreme Court, average life expectancy for a male was 54 years, and the average age of appointment was 46. So it tells you they didn't expect people to serve for a long time in the court. So we need to cut that off too. Next is anything that would impose fiscal restraints on the federal government. What does that mean? Most of us think of the idea of a balanced budget amendment, but it also means tax caps, spending caps, maybe tied to GDP or population plus inflation. We're going to have to put stuff in place to keep these people from spending. Because you know what the easiest thing in the world to do is? Spend other people's money. Right? There's no incentive to not spend money for them, so we have to create that incentive structure. Here's a little side story on government spending. During the height of the Tea Party, I don't know if I told you this story, Rick, I had a chance to go to the OMB, the Office of Management and Budget. Now, this is where they manage all federal money. Trillions of dollars. It's hard to imagine. And I got to sit around a big fancy conference table with all the guys in their ties. And these are all the accounting types, the bean counters in the federal government. And I had found something out that was really disturbing. I found out that they don't use generally accepted accounting principles. Now, if you're in business or even for your own taxes, you have to use what are called generally accepted accounting principles. That's abbreviated GAAP. We all use GAAP in our account. If you don't, you go to jail. That's just kind of how it works. They don't use GAAP at the federal government level. They just say they don't use those accounting principles. So I sat down at this meeting, sitting with all these bean counters, and I said, I understand y'all don't use GAAP in your accounting. So what principles do you have? And they said, well, we don't have any principles. Like, no, that's not what I meant. I mean, I understand that, but I was asking about accounting principles. And they literally said, well, we just do it how we want to do it. Yeah, what kind of a system is that?
No wonder we're 38 trillion on the
I mean, there's literally stuff that they call black book stuff, which means they spend billions of dollars on it, but it's not accounted for. So we don't even know how much money our government spends. And they tell you how much debt we have. We don't really know. They tell you how much you spend. We don't really know. So we need to impose something like generally accepted accounting principles on the federal government. And then finally.
Wait, so just repeat because I'm slow too.
Okay.
First one is term limits.
Term limits.
That can be anybody in the federal federal bureaucracy, Congress, all that. And then second is fiscal restraints. And so that can be balanced budget amendment, county principles, whatever that might be.
Yep. And the final one, what I think is actually the most important one, maybe the one that people don't think about as often, is limiting the scope and the jurisdiction of the federal government. A couple of big legal words. What's that mean? It means we can say to them, no, you can't do that. You know, when the Constitution was created, it was created with 17 enumerated powers. And what the framers said is, yeah, the federal government has limited enumerated powers. The states and the people have unlimited unenumerated powers. Today, it's pretty much exactly the opposite, right? Federal government, so they had 17, I think they have, 17,000 powers now. This has happened through the federal courts. It's happened through congressional overreach. There's all kinds of stuff the federal government does that they were.
And we wouldn't object to the federal government having a new power that the people thought it should have. Like something happens in the culture or technology or whatever it might be, and we say, that's an issue that no longer really works for the states because you don't need 50 different laws on that. We really should put this in the federal government's bucket of powers. But you need to amend the Constitution to do that. That's the only proper way to give the federal government a new power. They just taken it for the last 90 years. Something new comes up, and they go, oh, yeah, sure, we'll regulate that, or we'll create a new program for that. When Elon Musk first started doing the Doge thing, I was shocked. I've always said, they're doing all these things they shouldn't do, and we've probably got like 20 departments we need to actually get rid of and abolish. By the time he did the whole thing, it's more like 400 agencies and entire bureaucracies that have been created by the machine itself, not by us. We never authorized those things. That is how you drain the swamp. You have to get rid of all those agencies.
So what you can say, to give you specific examples, nope, can't be involved in education. That's unconstitutional. By the way, that one I can prove to you. Thomas Jefferson was best friends with William Henry Lee, and they wrote letters the way we text. I mean, I'm not exaggerating. These guys would write hundreds of letters back and forth. There was no other way to communicate if you weren't face to face. And so we have this record of all these letters these guys wrote back and forth. Well, in one of the letters, Jefferson was founding up the University of Virginia. You might not know this. He was the greatest proponent of public education at the time of the founding. I mean, he just said, if we don't have an educated population, we're going to lose our country. So he founds up this great university, and they call it University of Virginia. And William Henry Lee writes him a letter that says, you're founding this university. It's so important we have an educated population. You get the federal government to put some money in that. And Jefferson writes back and says, well, I would, but that would be unconstitutional. See, there's nothing in the Constitution that authorizes the federal government to spend money on education. Don't we spend money on education? Yeah, billions, hundreds of billions. So where'd that power come from? I mean, I looked for the education amendment in the Constitution, couldn't find it. And I know all 27, it's not in the 27. And so where'd it come from? It came from the courts just saying, oh, you know what? There's this thing called the Commerce Clause. It's in there somewhere. They literally just invented it. And that's true for most of the alphabet agencies that you know. And so we could say no Health and Human Services, no HUD, no Department of Energy, no Department of Education. What I'm saying is we can actually say to the federal government, no, we meant it the first time when we wrote the Constitution. 17 enumerated powers.
And Mark, this is so important because we're trying to say no right now through the president. The president's trying to defund the Department of Education, trying to get rid of a lot of these bureaucracies. And what's happening? Federal judge after federal judge after federal judge is blocking him and say, no, Congress did this, and you can't get rid of it on your own. It's going to have to be done through an act of Congress, which you're not going to get through certainly even a closely split Congress, so that you're not going to get rid of the Department of Education through presidential action. Now, he is redirecting the money. They fired half the employees. Kara found out last week at the meeting she went to in D.C. that had a lot of the Department of Ed folks there. So they're doing some good things. They're doing everything they can within the framework that's there, but they will never be able to do what actually needs to take place. Only the amendment process allows you to do that. And the amendment process, think of it this way, because we're celebrating the 250th of the Declaration. Everybody knows the whole, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they're endowed by their creator with certain inalienable rights among these life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that secure these rights, government, among men, direct their just power for the consent of the government. The next line, that when any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or abolish it. The amendment process is the altering or abolishing process. It's the only proper way to do this. And I can understand people's reticence. I can understand why it's taking this long to get to that point, because even Jefferson says in the next line, he says, prudence and evil, well, actually, first he says, laying its foundation on such principles of organizing power in this form as shall seem to them the most likely to affect their safety and happiness. But after that,
you're a show off, Mr. Green. That's impressive.
He says, prudence indeed will dictate The government's long established should not be changed for light and transient causes. So in other words, we don't change the design of our government for little things. He says, accordingly, all experience has shown that mankind are more disposed to suffer while evils are sufferable than to right themselves by abolishing the forms which they are accustomed. A bunch of fancy words to say. We're less likely to get involved and do what you're doing tonight and go do the heavy lifting to change things if we can suffer the evil. We'll suffer the evil while that evil suffers because we're busy raising our families and coaching Little League and building our churches and our businesses, doing all that. But then his next line says, but when a long train of abuses and usurpations pursuing inevitably the same object evinces the design to reduce them under absolute despotism, it is their right, it is their
duty
to throw off such governments and institute new guards for their future security, such as the nation's sufferings of these colonies, and such is now the necessity which constrains them to the separation. Now, for us, we don't have to go to the separation, but the necessity of where our government is right now has constrained us to this is the only option at this point to properly, constitutionally, peacefully, within the Constitution as it's designed, alter and abolish those things that government should never have been doing in the first place.
So I want to give you just a couple more things, and then we'll close and take questions. As I watch things unfold in Washington, D.C., I find myself inevitably drawn back to Convention of States. And it's not because that's my filter. I'm watching D.C. and I'm saying, well, what can we do about this? So I want to give you some really hard examples right now, literally. They're not going to pass the SAVE Act. I don't care. I mean, this actually drives me crazy. Call your congressman, tell him to pass this. This is what all these organizations do. Call your congressman. You know what your congressman thinks about that? He doesn't care. They don't care. They're dealing with stuff in DC. They don't care what we think, really, except maybe right around elections. And so it doesn't work. They're not going to pass the SAVE Act. I think we should pass the SAVE Act. I think we should have voter ID required for every election. And I think we should make sure that non-citizens can't vote, right? You know how you could
count it in the enumeration.
Yeah. Okay. Explain what the enumeration is. You're using a big word.
Census. Everybody says census, but that word is not in the Constitution. The word of the Constitution is enumeration, which reminds us that all they're supposed to be doing is enumerating.
Counting.
All they're supposed to be doing is counting how many citizens there are so they know how to break up the congressional districts and spread out the 435 districts. Which states are going to get them, and then how do you decide where in the states those are going to be? That's the only reason they should be doing that. They, of course, use it for all these other things now.
Right.
But when they count illegals, which is what they've been doing, what that does is it skews the districts into the blue cities that are sanctuary cities. So that's why you have, I've heard different numbers from different groups, anywhere from 20 to 40 seats right now that are Democrat that should be Republican if you did not count illegals.
So how do we fix that?
That has a big change.
You can go to convention, and in convention, you can essentially pass the SAVE Act and put it in the Constitution. It would be very reasonable for the Constitution to say that everybody must show legal ID in order to vote, that everybody must be able to prove they're a citizen. You can put right in the Constitution how the enumeration works and that it counts only legal citizens. That should be in the Constitution. We shouldn't be having a fight about this. This should not be a political issue. That is a constitutional issue. Here's another one that's near and dear to me and Rick, because we're from Texas. You know, when the border was wide open, I promise you, whatever you saw on TV, whatever you heard, it was so much worse than that. I mean, so much worse. McAllen, Texas, right on the border, and I had the privilege of having dinner with a former Border Patrol officer tonight. It was so bad down there, it was a war zone. I mean, it was a literal war zone. I went down there, the city was overrun with illegals. It was overrun with cartels. Every corner where there was like a convenience store or a gas station, you would see dozens and dozens of illegals just loitering around. It was terrible. Normal people couldn't go out at night. People couldn't go to restaurants. People were struggling to go to their churches. It was hell down there in McAllen. And we as Texans are a unique breed of people, in case you haven't noticed. We think we're better than everybody else at pretty much everything. Rick? Yeah. I'm working on this, his humility.
There's only two kinds of people. There are Texans and those that want to be Texans. That's not true.
No. I wasn't always a Texan, so I'm not infected with that particular disease.
Well, but give me a talk on the drive.
Yeah, come on. It's not.
The room, Green. Come on.
But it's the same way you guys would be here. It's like, oh, hell no, we'll take care of this ourselves. We'll close our own dang border if you're not going to close our border. And Texans wanted to close our own border. And while our governor often doesn't do the things he should, I got to say, he was pretty good on this. And he started putting those floats in the river, and he started putting up razor wire. Can you believe we even had a debate about whether he's allowed to do that? Oh, I'm sorry, you folks there in Texas, you got to be overrun by illegals coming from the third world. You don't have a choice. We, the federal government, are going to impose those people on you. Well, you could put in the Constitution that the states have the concurrent right with the federal government to enforce existing border and immigration law. I'm not saying you turn that law over to the states and it's up to them, because we have a national border and we have national immigration laws. But whatever laws on the books, the states that are on the border should have the right to enforce all of those laws. That could just be put in the Constitution. So a lot of these issues that come up that you hear about that drive you crazy, that you can't believe Washington, D.C. isn't dealing with. Today, I want you to think, when you watch the news, think, could we do something about that with the Convention of States? And the big one I want you to think about when you think about it is, can we limit the power of the federal government? I want you to understand this really important concept. Like if I say that you have to show an ID to vote, how does that limit the power of the federal government? Because it prevents the federal government from saying you can vote without an ID. We're saying, no, we're constraining you in that area. Constitutionally, you don't have a choice, federal government, to decide whether we need an ID or not. So anything that would constrain the exercise of power by the federal government, we can do under Convention of States.
Mark, can I throw something in there?
Yeah, go ahead.
Because I know there's got to be some people thinking, yeah, but man, they don't follow the Constitution now. So if you do this amendment, how do you know that they will then not allow people to vote without an ID? And I think it's very important to recognize. Name me a constitutional amendment passed within the last 100 years that is not being followed. The ones they're not following are more than 100 years old. We will follow a constitutional amendment for a good century. Maybe only 50 years, but if we get 50 years of following these new amendments that we're going to pass, that can save the country. And then we might have to do another convention. I frankly think we ought to do one every 10 years myself, because it'll keep the feds in check. But anyway, just anytime you fall into that, because I did the same thing. I was like, man, they're not following the Second Amendment now. They're not following the Fourth Amendment now. They're violating all these things. And then I finally realized, no, actually it's because they were so long ago that the courts have been able to just tweak it just a little bit over time, and it becomes something unrecognizable. And they will do that with new amendments, but it takes a long time for them to do it. So if we get in the habit of keeping them in check, we'll restore the balance. But the checks and balances only work if you use the check.
Yeah, and I want to explain why it's not pixie dust. Amendments aren't magic. The reason that they follow amendments is what Rick said. It's the most muscular form of politics in the United States of America. It's really hard. It's hard to get 34 states to call. I've been doing this for 13 years. We're at 20 states. It's hard to do. Framers intended for it to be really hard. And Rick was quoting framers, right? They don't want this to be easily changed. So it's really hard to do. It takes a massive national consensus. And then I want you to think about this: 38 states to ratify, a super majority to ratify. So Congress and the courts don't just go, hey, you know what? We don't care. The whole country just did this thing. We're going to do whatever we want. Doesn't work that way. You might not have noticed this, but I'll point it out to you at the lack of, I don't know, being repetitive. The creatures in Congress are not the stiffest of spine, right? So not the most courageous members of our society. And so these amendments tend to stick when we do them. So I think we should close there, Rick. And what I'd love to do is take some questions.
The question I have, and I may get some of these numbers wrong, because I know you guys know more than I know. So if 38 states come together, do their thing, okay, and they say, okay, we're going to limit them to whatever, all the things you can
say 12-year terms or something, right?
And then they put it goes back to the 50 states, all 50 states, whether they were part of the convention or not, right?
Which they most likely all of them will. Even somebody that didn't want it to happen, they're going to be like, okay, now the game.
Yeah, it's called a general convention, so they'll all participate.
But how many blue states do we have?
Yeah, I was thinking about that math too when you were saying that. I was like, okay,
So,
we have 34 red. We're going to need probably 4 blue states to do ratification, which is why we won't pass a life amendment. We're not going to pass a marriage amendment. We're not going to pass any issue amendment. They're all process amendments, and the reason a blue state will pass it is because they're thinking, I don't want Donald Trump telling me what to do. I don't want this Supreme Court telling me what to do. I want the power. So the the selfish interests of the human being that the founders talked about. That's the tension that makes this whole thing work. So even blue states are going to be wanting the power themselves, and the amendments that will actually pass a convention are all about sending the power back home to the
Well, let me add to that.
So it's the state legislatures that are going to vote on it.
Yeah.
And the governors or the whatever.
They have nothing to do with it. So, and let me add to that.
Great question.
The things that are going to come out of convention are uniformly popular with the American people. And so if you poll term limits have been polled for 35 years consistently, always over 85%. So that's blue states, red states. I mean, it's just a massive majority. If you poll a balanced budget, it's about 80%. Red states, blue states, everybody thinks the federal government's financially out of control. Yeah, 87%. This is really important. You're not going to get anything radical, conservative, or liberal out of a convention. These have to be, this is part of the reason we chose the three areas we chose. They got to be ideas that are mainstream, central to American society, because this is designed to rein in the federal government when the population broadly believes it's out of control. This process is specifically designed not to allow a segment of the population to change the Constitution. It's got to be a super majority of the population.
Only people that won't have a voice at the convention are the ones in Washington, D.C. The District of Columbia will not be represented at the convention because they're not a state. And that's the only group stopping these things.
Yep.
Mr. Green, my question for you is, the movement of the national popular vote has indicated right now we're at 222 of the 270 of the Electoral College. We could have 270 by the 2028 election. But the convention states that we already have our proposed delegates. If the movement to the popular vote does occur, how does this affect convention states and we get rid of the Electoral College?
It's a great question. It's timely because Virginia's governor, I think, just signed theirs with that. I think it's what some of the people do. Or maybe.
We're 6 states away.
Yeah. Yeah. And this is a, you know, the founders would be shocked that a state would be willing to give away their electoral votes, which is what national popular vote does. Like now that Virginia.
Rick, would you explain how national popular vote works?
So instead of the electoral college, the electoral college would still be there. Constitutionally, you still have to do the electoral college. It's an end run around it because, for instance, Virginia, what they just did is they said, okay, no matter who wins Virginia, we're going to give our electoral votes to whoever wins the popular vote. Now, can you imagine being California and Kamala Harris wins the electoral college, but Donald Trump wins, she wins the electoral college, but Donald Trump wins the popular vote, but California has to now give their electoral votes to Donald Trump. That's how this works. That's how national popular vote works. So it still works within the electoral college, but it defaults, any state that's adopted this compact, they are basically saying, because here's the thing, state legislatures get to decide how the electoral vote is cast. You don't have a popular vote in your state unless your state legislature wants you to. That's the design of the founders. This is part of why we were screaming in November and December of 2020, these 6 states that cheated. And when I say cheated, I'm not talking about Dominion or any of that. I'm talking about they violated the Constitution when governors changed the election law without the state legislature. That is unconstitutional. It's very specific in the Constitution that only the legislature can set your election law in your state. And so you had Pennsylvania and in Georgia, it was the Secretary of State. Yet just in these 6 key states, there was a constitutional break where they changed election law. The state legislature in those states absolutely had the constitutional right to convene themselves and say, no, our electoral votes are going to go to whoever. Or because they tainted the election by changing the election laws and we didn't get a chance to fix it, we don't want our electoral votes to even be counted. They could have done that, should have done that. But by God's grace, we got Joe Biden for 4 years. And I know this shocks you for me to say that. But without the pain and the tough times that we went through, Donald Trump would not be doing what he's doing right now in his second term. So actually, in my thinking, it was God's design for us ultimately to get there. But my point is, the state legislature, the Supreme Court's done 3 different decisions on this, has upheld the idea that the state legislature gets to decide where their electoral votes go. So right now, you have an election in Montana, and your state legislature has said, your electoral votes are going to go to whoever wins the popular vote within Montana. That's what everybody does. It makes sense. We should do it that way. But what these guys are doing is they're saying that once we have a combination of enough electoral votes from enough states to equal 270 or more, we're no longer going to give our electoral votes to the winner of our state. We're going to give it to the winner of the whole country national popular vote. So it's a really, really bad idea. It's moving towards democracy and away from a republic. And it's a manipulation of the Constitution, but it is absolutely being seen. And it could get there. Now, your question was, how would it affect a convention? It wouldn't affect the convention taking place or how a convention is called or any of those things, but it could very much lead to an amendment at the convention to say we're going to more clearly define that that a state cannot give away its electoral votes. I don't know that that would happen, though, because I think the whole convention's attitude is going to be let the state decide. If you want to give away your electoral votes as a state, that's up to you. I think it's foolish, but it would ultimately destroy the electoral college if we ever get over 270, which means if they have their way, national popular vote happens, then the president of the United States will be elected by the big cities. So now Houston is going to be more important than the entire state of Texas, and they'll be incentivized to cheat and run up the vote in those big cities so that they win the national popular vote. Right now, if you run up the vote in Los Angeles, the best prize you're going to get is the 55 electoral votes of California. You're not going to get the whole country. At best, you're going to win those electoral votes. So the system works incredibly well. By the way, there were 11 guys in the convention on the committee that created the Electoral College. Roger Sherman chaired it, and they created an amazing system where you get popular vote within the states, you get the states getting to make decisions and vote, you get Congress involved. If nobody gets the majority of the Electoral College, it goes to the House. I mean, there's just a lot. It's a complicated, really cool system and design that has served us incredibly well. We've had 5 times now that the person that won the Electoral College did not win the national popular vote. The founders didn't want you to just be able to win the national popular vote to be president. They wanted you to have to be, not just in big cities or in regions, but be able to be president of the whole country. So anyway, great question. I don't think it'll affect the convention unless I'm missing something.
No, I think you're right.
But it could lead to an amendment that prevents it from happening. I just hadn't thought about whether or not that would, even an amendment would solve it.
I want to add one thing, and I did a deep dive on this because I'm very concerned about national popular vote.
Yeah.
It's absolutely unconstitutional.
Yeah.
The courts will strike it down.
And it violates the spirit of the Constitution.
It's not just that, Rick. So you said something really important, which is the state legislature has the right to send their electoral votes where they want to send their electoral votes. So what they're doing is saying, we're going to prevent the state legislature from having that right any longer. You can't do that. The Constitution grants the right to this. Right, because
overrule the Constitution without having a Constitution.
Because the sitting legislature during an election has the right to determine where their electoral votes go. And what this is saying is,
the report said they can change it at any time.
So
you're saying they couldn't change it.
Well, I'm saying in a state legislature, in a given election, they could say, well, we're going to send it to the guy who won the national popular vote. Right? They could do that in 2028. Right? But if you just say, no, from now on, Virginia has to give their votes to whoever wins the national popular vote. You've now deprived that state legislature of their constitutional right to determine where their electoral votes go. So I'm 100% certain about this. The Supreme Court will say no. We've actually had this. We had the faithful electors law. Like, you cannot deprive the state legislature of their rights under the Constitution. We know this from Convention of States as well, by the way. We just won a case in Kansas. Most of you know we passed Kansas. The reason we passed Kansas is because the Kansas Constitution imposed something on the state legislature that prevented them from exercising their right under the U.S. Constitution. U.S. Constitution says state legislature gets to call a convention of states, right? And their Constitution said, we're going to limit your right to do that. You have to have a 2/3 majority. And the federal court said, no, you can't do that. That's a constitutional right. You can't take that right or limit that right to the legislature. So NPV is very dangerous, and it's an important movement we should pay attention to, but it is unconstitutional.
I'm so glad you asked that. See what happens when your coach as long as you've been a coach. Yes.
I know that was a deep dive on the national popular vote, but that's important. All right, who else? Any other questions?
I love it. That was good.
Oh, here we go.
Anybody with a flashpoint shirt gets to that.
My question is, you talked about having a convention every 10 years. Do you have to start over, getting the states to approve everything again?
Yes. Yeah, you would absolutely have to start over. I mean, here's a weird nuance to this, Rick, which I forget who told me this. Somebody in one of the states, somebody a lot smarter than me, said, you know, it's possible that a convention of the states could recess.
I was thinking about that.
Like, and just say, yeah, we're going to recess and we're going to come back again 2 years from now, 10 years. Like, that's a possibility. But the reality is they really should, according to the Constitution, start over, because they're supposed to talk about what they were going to talk about only. If they were to recess, they could still only talk about those 3 subjects.
That's right.
So you have to stick around for a while to get it going again.
Yes, exactly. I'll stick around as long as the Lord will have me.
I think the second convention is going to be so much easier.
I agree with that.
Once everybody sees it and it's on, you know, you're watching that whole convention take place, the world doesn't fall apart, the sky doesn't fall. You know what I mean? It'll get rid of a lot of that. And I think a lot of those people that oppose us now will go through the same journey. I think that, you know, where I was opposed, once I dug a lot deeper, started getting more familiar with it, started realizing how it's going to work, then I became a champion of it. And there's so many people like that. Mark Levin, same thing. He started to write his book against it, ended up becoming really kind of the godfather of the movement. In a way, He's like the intellectual godfather of the movement. And I think there'll be a lot of people even now that oppose us that once they see the first convention take place, that a lot of those fears will go away. And they'll say, you know what, we need to do this more.
It'll be easier.
Sean?
Yeah.
Yes, I'm Shane Clack, I'm the legislator for House District 37, and I introduced this resolution at the House floor. The first one, business and labor, and the chair of that board was Ed Buttry right here from Great Falls. He spent a lot of time trying to get it out of committee. Once we got it on the floor, we knew we didn't have the votes, but we got it for a vote on it. I've heard all the things why we shouldn't do this runaway convention and some, but one of them that I hope you could answer with some clarity, that is, there's a lot of people say, well, there's no rules set out in the Constitution for how to do this. Well, go to your Bill of Rights, there's no rule about how to select a jury either.
Right.
They just knew how to do it. And they knew how to do conventions in that time when they wrote it.
Right. Yeah, so I think that, Shane, that's super important. And by the way, thank you for being willing to champion this. And that's, by the way, an important thank you, because these guys take some real heat from some people when they support this. I mean, it can be a very contentious issue. The fringe on the right that's against us is pretty vicious. Just to be direct about it, they act a lot like leftists. They scream at you, they yell at you, they call you names. They say we're supported by George Soros. So I'm sure, Shane, you got some of that too. You know, I think this is really interesting.
Which we're not, by the way.
I thought you brought the check, Rick. This is really interesting because the Constitution doesn't lay out the rules for a convention. It doesn't say exactly how it works. And so people are like, well, there are no rules. Why isn't that in the Constitution? You know what's really interesting? Our Constitution does not have a lot of detail in it. Like, if you read the whole Constitution, there's all kinds of stuff that if you didn't know.
Impeachment of a president.
How does that work?
Tell you how that trial is going to work.
Right.
It tells you what the vote's got to be at the end.
So there's all kinds. Here's my favorite one. You just mentioned this. It says that we're all entitled to due process, the due process of law. What's that? Like, how come they just said due process? They did say right to a trial by a jury of your peers, right? But how do we know a criminal verdict has to be unanimous? Doesn't say that in the Constitution. And the reason is because when they were sitting around in Constitution Hall, or Independence Hall, drafting this, they had a common experience. This is why originalism is so important. I even sometimes call it contextualism. You have to understand the context in which these things were done. And so when they were talking due process, like, I didn't have to say to my colleague to my right, well, Mr. Green, what is due process? Because we all knew what we all knew you got a jury trial. We all knew it took a unanimous conviction in a jury trial. We all knew a bunch of things about due process, so we didn't write them down in the Constitution. And one of those things was what it looks like to have a convention of states. There were 11 conventions of states prior to 1787. Almost everybody that was in there as a delegate to the Constitutional Convention had been in those conventions. So if I had stood up and said, well, Colonel Mason, like, how does a convention of states work? He would have said, Good Lord, man, we were just in 2 of them in the last 5 years. What's wrong with you? We all know how that works. And so then, well, what does that mean? What are the rules? Well, how would we know what the rules were? Oh, interesting, because we had 11 before 1787. We had 1787. We've had roughly 31 interstate conventions since 1787. You know what's amazing? They all use basically the same rules. And we have the rules for the vast majority of them. My guess, this is a guess, educated guess, is that we will use what are called Mason's rules. Mason's rules are the rules that about 70% of the legislatures use. Why do I think we'll use Mason's rules? Because about 90% of the delegates will likely be state legislatures, either sitting or retired legislators. So that's what they're used to.
They're used to doing it, yeah.
Right. So they're going to be like, oh, well, we're running a legislative body, essentially. We'll use Mason's rules. There'll be a few extra different rules in there because you're holding a convention of states. It's not specifically a legislature. We've actually drafted a model rule set for a convention of states. We used that at both of our simulated conventions. We drafted one, then we improved it for the second convention. So that will be out there also as a recommended potential rule set for them. We have a pretty good idea how they're going to operate. One of the questions that comes up all the time, Shane, is, well, how do you know it's one state, one vote? We've never had a convention that wasn't one state, one vote. By the way, they tried to once. It was called the Virginia Convention. It was prior to the Civil War. They tried to hold a convention, and the big states said, we should really have proportional representation. They thought it would be better if we did it by population. So they held a vote to determine if they would switch that convention to proportional representation. How do you think they held that vote? One state, one vote. And what do you think the small states said? No. And so they did it one state, one vote. I mean, this is just the way it works. Also remember, it's called a convention of the states. It's not a convention of delegates. It's not a convention of the populations. It's a convention of sovereign entities known as states. So each state gets one vote. But we have a pretty good idea of what the rule set looks like. We also, here's another reason I don't worry about that. It's going to take a supermajority, 34 states, to call the convention. Those states, by and large, are going to be Republican states, some more conservative than others, but mostly red states. They're going to determine what the rules are because they're the supermajority. They're going to bring a rule set with them. Virginia brought the Virginia plan to convention. A bunch of these red states. Texas, by the way, I don't even know if you know this, the governor's office is putting together a commission on what Texas is going to do at convention. So I think you got nominated to be on that commission. And so a bunch of states are going to do this. And so we have a pretty good idea of how that convention is going to operate and what the rule set is. And by the way, what do you think the small states are going to do if they don't like the way the rules come out? Are they just going to stay and hang out? No, they're going to leave and deprive the convention of a quorum, and the convention just ends. So they're going to have to get a rule set that the supermajority of states agree upon. Those are our states.
And I think you'll even see a lot of, working on even who are those 4 blue states going to be to ratify. So even as they're working to come up with an amendment that not only can pass convention, but ultimately pass the states, they're going to be working with some of the more purple states at the convention going, okay, you may not vote for this while we're here, but once we get it done, how do we get you later on? And then we're going to have sort of like what we're seeing now with some of the other movements within each state, massive movements to get it ratified in that state, just like you saw with other.
I also think ratification is way easier than getting to convention. And the reason I say that is right now, convention is like a new thing. People haven't heard about it. They're afraid. They don't know what's going to happen. Right now, you're going to be like, oh, yeah, term limits? Yeah, of course we want term limits. Oh, balanced budget? Of course we want a balanced budget. I think getting to 38 is much easier than getting to 34.
Good.
Hi, guys. Thanks for the conversation so far. So I'm Tony Gonzalez. I'm running here in Constitution. Big supporter of Convention of States. Even at the worst possible outcome, I think, where we don't get anything passed out of that, I think we still end up having a national conversation at the state level and the state and citizen level, which, again, I think that's nothing but that. But ideally, we would want to have things passed. And to me, especially, because I've been asked questions, especially about like the runaway convention, what is how do we end up preventing that? And to me, the answer to that is always the Supreme Court, and even just to validate or potentially challenge any of those amendments would also be. But you gave an example of the Supreme Court not necessarily wanting to side with the states, and instead side with the federal government. And even Antonin Scalia, I really appreciate him, but he even has a quote: "Bringing your hands about states' rights, forget it, they're gone. Basically, the federal government can do whatever it wants. Who's going to protect the states? My court? We're fed." And so, if we have one of those amendments, like imposing term limits on Supreme Court justices, and that gets challenged, when that Supreme Court does, more likely than not, or have incentive to want to throw that amendment away at this process.
I think you'll end up seeing statesmanship at the court level that'll surprise you in that moment. They'll actually say, and granted, the first time they've said it since McCardle in 1860, whatever it was Sam Alito saying, with the Dobbs case, this is not our decision. This is not our power. It's not within our purview. And I think they'll say that in this case because it's not in their purview to review a constitutional amendment. So I actually disagree with that being a reason against a runaway convention or whatever. The Supreme Court, I don't believe, will have any say over whether or not an amendment is constitutional, because an amendment in and of itself is constitutional. It is the Constitution.
As long as it's gone through the process, that's yeah.
That's true. They could review.
They can review the process, yeah.
But they can't review whether or not, if term limits pass, they don't think that would be quote unquote constitutional, because you're literally changing the Constitution.
Yeah, and I would add this. So a lot of people think that we don't know what the courts would do with this stuff. And I hear that argument all, well, we have no idea what the courts would do. There's an entire treatise that's been written on what the courts have done around Article 5. It's written by Professor Rob Natelson, who was a law professor here in Montana, actually. And it's called The Law of Article 5. Creative title. If you're having trouble sleeping, I highly recommend keeping this on your bedstand. Unless you're a lawyer geek like me and Rick, you might like it. But it lays out literally all the cases and all the law around Article 5. People who've never litigated. Over 40 cases have been litigated around Article 5. And there's a theme that comes out of these cases as you read them. Mostly what the courts say is that stuff around Article 5 is non-justiciable. Yeah. And what that word means is, yeah, the courts don't get involved. And we don't get involved because this is a process between the states and the federal government, and it's not for the courts. The courts don't like to get involved in those kind of fights. The one other thing that they do consistently, that they say consistently, is you got to follow the rules. Like once the rules are set, you got to follow the rules. The latest case that you guys actually might be aware of on that is the case surrounding the ERA, the Equal Rights Amendment. The Equal Rights Amendment started in the 1970s. It was a really dangerous, bad thing. It's been brought up again. We call it the zombie amendment because it's been defeated. The time limit's over. People keep saying they could still vote on it and pass it. And what happened was there was a term set by Congress to ratify the ERA. It was 7 years. And at 7 years, they hadn't ratified it. So Congress like, well, we'll give you another 7 years, right? And then there was litigation around whether that was okay, whether Congress could actually do that. And Mike Ferris, my co-founder of the organization, was one of the primary lawyers litigating that case. And it got to the appellate court, and the appellate court said, can't change the rules midstream. Like there are rules, you got to follow the rules. That ended up being moot. It didn't matter because the second 7 year period elapsed and the ERA died. But the courts have been very consistent. One, don't want to be involved. Number two is we will make sure that people followed the rules. And I think that's a good role for the courts.
I can't remember wasn't that the one that something about it got all the way to the Supreme Court, and it was Ruth Bader Ginsburg even, or maybe it's just a question to her outside of.
That was an outside question.
Yeah. Where even she said, obviously she was a proponent of the ERA, but she said you cannot change the rules, and you know, that would be absurd. And then I would just point to the 11th Amendment, which was literally an amendment overruling the Supreme Court. You would think if the Supreme Court was going to have a say, they would say, well, we overrule your overruling. You know, they obviously didn't. It became a law.
Any other questions before we close? I'll do one more, and we'll close with a story maybe. How's that?
Okay, so I'm in total agreement. But on that note, there's the 16th Amendment. There's a lot of controversy over whether that really got ratified. But why I'm referring to it mostly is the fact that how long do we have to ratify it after amendments are passed by extension? state. But I would like a comment on what happened with the 16th Amendment, which gives the right of the federal government to tax the citizenry. And the fact that a lot of those states have even withdrawn their ratification of the amendment and went well over the time.
Yeah, I would say, first of all, that the Constitution already gave the power to the federal government to tax and even to have an income tax. What the 16th Amendment change was, it allowed you to have a progressive instead of being a capitation tax, and everybody paid the exact same. There's definitely some arguments that a comma was in a different place, or B instead of, almost like King James versus, ESV. But the essence of all of those arguments that were made didn't work. And so all of these movements that you've heard of, you don't have to pay your income tax. As I say in the constitutional line class, go talk to Wesley Snipes and find out what it's like to go to jail for not paying your income tax. So yeah, don't get too caught up in those. It definitely was ultimately ratified, and then that was 1913. We have lived for over 100 years with that as the law of the land. So it's just not a good argument. But in terms of length of ratification, would depend on the proposal. And I think, Mark, the proposals, are they going to have a time limit on them? What do you think?
I mean, I think based on the experience.
Because, by the way, there's been like 10,000 amendments,
proposed,
potential amendments proposed in Congress, and up until a few years ago, they didn't put time limits on them. And really, since the ERA thing, that's when they started doing these 7-year deals. Don't forget, the 27th Amendment was ratified after 200 years. The 27th Amendment was initially in the Bill of Rights. It was actually number 2. So for those of us that have Second Amendment patches, that would mean something totally different. Ratified. But it didn't get ratified by enough states because there was no time limit on it. So 200 years later, this guy in Austin, Texas, going to the University of Texas, was going to write his paper on the ERA amendment that Mark was talking about. And then he found this unratified amendment and said, wow, we can still ratify this thing. So he writes his paper on it. His professor says, that's ridiculous, that'll never happen, give him the C-. He gets mad and decides, I'm going to make this happen. He started writing letters to state legislators all over the country. 10 years later, enough states ratified it that it is now the 27th Amendment of the Constitution. So the University of Texas went into his records, his grades, and changed the grade on his paper to an A+.
By the way, he's a staffer in the Texas legislature.
I always tell that story because it proves 2 things. Number one person can make it. And number 2, it proves that all great things come from Texas.
By the way, he makes sure, so when you pass a state, you have to file that call or that application with the House and the Senate. And Greg tracks that for us, man. And he hounds us. It's like, hey, the one from Texas has not been filed in the Senate yet. So, yeah. So I think they'll set a time limit. I'm guessing if it were me and I were advising, and I probably will get a chance to do some of that, the convention will probably set a time limit. They will probably say, we want to give the states a certain amount of years, and then Congress will impose that time limit when they send it out to the states for ratification. Okay. Now, we are the rulers in this country, that we are in charge, but that means you got to do something with that, right? And so for me, my thing is doing convention of states, and that's what I've dedicated my life to. It's to my Lord, it's to my family, and it's to my country. And my dedication to my country is to push for a convention of states. I'm going to do this as long as I live until it's done. I can promise you that. The question that you have to ask yourselves is, what are you going to do? And you came to this meeting tonight, and I appreciate you and love you for doing that. And I said this, and I mean it. You're extraordinary just because you came to this room. It's a big deal what you did. Now the question is, will you actually continue? Will you go out there and be in the fight? And I will tell you with all sincerity, we desperately need you in the fight, especially here in this state. We're going to have a fight in this legislature to get it done. And the way we get it done is we have enough people who volunteer to help run events like this, to go to the legislature when it's time, to write to your legislator, to call your legislator. And God knows you're busy. I know how busy y'all are. And I know you got a lot of stuff going on in your lives. You got kids, grandkids, work, retirement, all that stuff, travel. But we need you and the country needs you. And so I would ask that you go to Joe at the back of the room, and he's over there and he'll help you. You saw him get his challenge coin tonight. He'll help you get involved. Look, an hour a week, an hour a month, whatever you can do, we need you. So get with Joe and talk about it. I'd love to close with a couple of stories if we could. Rick and I both love telling stories. We love stories from American history. So I'd like you to think about while I tell mine, you think about what your favorite one you'd like to close the night with is. Maybe one I haven't heard before. Teach me something new. I'm going to tell.
One I haven't heard.
Yeah, no, I don't think I can. You've taught me most of that. I know. My favorite story from American history is the story of Captain Levi Preston. A lot of you have heard this story. Rick has. Is the statue there yet?
No, we haven't gotten it yet. If somebody tonight wants to sponsor that statue.
Of Levi Preston. He's going to have a statue at Patriot Academy. Captain Levi Preston is a guy that you won't find in any history books. And the story that I heard about him was told to me just at an event one night. And I was so stunned by it. I had to go look it up and see if it was real. In 1843, there was a historian traveling around the country. His name was Mellon Chamberlain. And Chamberlain was a 26-year-old school teacher and self-appointed historian. And what he was trying to do in 1843 was capture the stories of the last remaining Minutemen. I want you to think about that, 1843, all the way back to the Revolutionary War. These guys were old at this point. Late 80s, early 90s. And we all know a lot of people. I know guys work their ranch in their late 80s, early 90s. Back then, that was Methuselah old. Like if you had a guy in your town and he was 90 years old, everybody in town knew who he was. And that guy knew some stuff, and people loved to hear the stories. So Chamberlain could go into any town in the country, just travel around and ask, like, any Minutemen? Do you know any Minutemen in your state or in your town? And if there was one, everybody knew who it was. So it was in North Carolina, and he happened across Captain Levi Preston. And what he was trying to do is figure out why they fought the Revolutionary War. But he wanted to hear it from the mouths of the men who actually went out on the field of battle. Because he had read it in his history books. It was already in the history books. People already knew their history about the American Revolution, but he wanted to hear it directly from them. Remember, they don't, no video recorders, no tape recorders. Like if you don't get it from the person's mouth, if they don't look in your eyes and tell you that story, if it's not written down, it goes away forever. So he talks to Preston and he asks him a series of questions about why he fought. And these questions come from what Chamberlain's beliefs were about why we fought the Revolutionary War. It's because history had already been written. He'd already read the history. He already thought he knew exactly why we fought. And so he says to Captain Preston, Captain Preston, when you went out to the field of battle that day to face off against the Redcoats, exactly what did you mean? And Preston doesn't even understand that question. Like, what did we mean? What do you mean, what did we mean? And he goes, well, why did you go out and fight? Was it because of the high tax on British tea? You were just frustrated by the tea tax. It was unfair. It was taxation without representation. Preston says, son, we were farmers. We didn't drink no tea. We drank coffee. The tea, the boys dumped it in the harbor. We thought that was pretty funny, but that was that. I mean, I don't know about you guys. You got to forgive me. I went to school in Los Angeles, California, so I didn't really learn any real history. But I did learn that the tea tax was kind of a big deal, and that's why they fought the American Revolution. So he gets a no on that one. He goes, well, maybe it was the Stamp Act. You guys remember the Stamp Act? Like you guys, he said to Preston, you guys had to buy those stamps. You had to put them on all their documents. It was really just a tax for you guys, and must have been very frustrating. He said, stamps? Now, I remember Governor Bernard locked all the stamps in the armory. I'm sure I never bought one of them. No tea tax, no Stamp Act. He still went out to fight. He's all, well, maybe you were reading the writers, the great writers that inspired the revolutionaries, like Montesquieu and Locke, and maybe you read Paine on Common Sense. Preston says, son, we never read any of that. Like, we read Bible, Psalms. Some of us read the Almanac, but those men you speak of, I don't know those names. So you think about that. Now he's asked him about all the things we learned that caused the American Revolution, that made men be willing to go out to the field of battle against the Redcoats, and none of them drove him out to the field of battle. I imagine if I was Mellon Chamberlain at that point, I'd be a little bit frustrated, a little bit flabbergasted. Like, I think I know, and this guy's saying no to everything. And so he goes big and he says, maybe it was the heavy hand of British tyranny. Just couldn't take it anymore. He goes, tyranny? I never felt any tyranny. And so he says, well, why did you fight? Like, what made you go out and fight those Redcoats? And I want to put this in context for you. He was a farmer. He had a wife and kids. He was a farmer. He was not a soldier. He was not trained to fight. He was not a military man. It's as if I said to you guys tonight, hey, by the way, there's a Marine battalion coming to town. I'd love you to go home and get your firearms. We're going to fight them. It's the greatest fighting force ever assembled in human history. The best trained, the best fed, the best equipped, the most disciplined, the most motivated. This was the best fighting force in human history, and farmers went out to fight these guys. So this is when he's asking this question. It's kind of unbelievable that they went out to the field of battle. And so he says, well, why did you do it? And he said, son, when we went out to face them redcoats, we meant only one thing. We had always governed ourselves, and we always intended to. Them redcoats, they just intended that we shouldn't. He was so profoundly occupied with the idea that he was the master of his own destiny, that he was allowed to do what he wanted to do in his own country, that he was willing to put his life on the line for it. And that's in your political DNA. Every single one of you has that wired into you, this belief that the government should not be allowed to tell you what to do. And that's what we're fighting for. And, you know, when I stand up here, when I travel around the country, it's impossible for me to imagine being George Washington, the indispensable man, Patrick Henry, the greatest orator of the American Revolution, Madison, the guy who knew absolutely everything about every system of government ever invented, Jefferson, one of the most worldly men ever known, Benjamin Franklin, who I would argue probably the last man to know the vast majority of human knowledge across all subjects. I'm not like any of those people. But I am exactly like Levi Preston. And so are you. And so when you go home tonight and you look at yourself in that mirror, I want you to remember that that's who you are and that's whose shoes you walk in. And someday somebody's going to ask you, if you fought, why did you fight?
Story, I'm just going to give you a couple of quotes. I'm going to give you a quote from Reagan's first speech in public office and from his last speech in public office. In 1967, he was being sworn in as governor. And we've all seen the quote, we've all heard it. It's on my website, it's been there for 30 years. Freedom is a fragile thing. It's never more than one generation away from extinction. We don't pass it in the bloodstream, it's got to be fought for. And to kind of paraphrase what he said, we have to purposely instill it in the next generation. And frankly, we got to purposely instill it in us. And that's kind of what he said at the end, last public speech, as he's leaving the White House. He says, if we forget what we did, we won't know who we are. And that was, what would that be, January of '89. So he's leaving public life, leaving public office, and he said something that has actually come true. He said, I'm warning of an eradication of the American memory that will lead to an erosion of the American spirit. The reason you have so little patriotism in America compared to what it used to be is because we stopped telling the stories of Levi Preston. We stopped telling the stories of Jefferson and of these other great heroes from our entire history. Audie Murphy. I mean, just go through the whole thing. Sybil Ludington. I think if we're going to win this thing back in the long run, I got a warning for you tonight. Don't buy into the black pillars out there. These people that are trying to black pill the right, trying to black pill the patriots and make you think maybe America really wasn't the good guys. You actually have people on the right now saying that Churchill was the bad guy, Hitler was the good guy. Are you kidding me? You have people right now that question. I'm just asking questions. You have kind of like Satan in the garden asking questions. Did God really say? What they're actually doing is undermining our patriotism and our belief in the value system upon which America was built. By taking bad things in America's history and only telling the bad and the ugly, and even frankly lying and creating false perceptions by asking questions that plant a poison in the minds of our people that isn't even true, but it's causing that erosion of the American spirit because we don't have the foundation of knowing what we did. See, if we remember what we did, we'll know who we are, and then when those questions come up, they don't bother us because we know the truth of American exceptionalism. We know that America did, in fact, save the world from Nazism, communism, despotism, just go down the list. Did, in fact, export freedom so that millions of people around the world could enjoy what we're enjoying as well. Did, in fact, lay down our lives, our toil, our treasure to save Europe, to save the entire world. If we knew those stories, we wouldn't fall for this black pilling that's happening right now. So don't let it happen to you. Don't fall for the poison that a lot of these crazy people are planting
And because it's dividing our movement and it's causing people to no longer want to fight for the very things we're here fighting for tonight. Don't let that happen to you. And the way to avoid it is tell the stories. Tell these stories like we just heard. Tell the stories of your ancestors. Many of you in this room have parents and grandparents that fought in the Great Wars, that did incredible things, that even just by surviving, if you could survive a winter in Montana, you ought to be telling people about it. that literally carved out a living and carved out a life in places like Montana and westward expansion. I mean, there's so many great stories we can tell if we'll tell them. So that's why we're so adamant about civics and history and making it fun and entertaining and bringing it to life, because we want to remember what we did so we'll know who we are and we'll say no to all that nonsense. And that's actually how Reagan finished that speech. He said, we've got to start get back to the basics, start teaching civics, start having civic ritual. Tonight is civic ritual. We're literally coming together, reminding ourselves how our Constitution works, what some of these stories, what can we do to restore the Constitution. So find some ways to do some civic ritual. And I think being a part of Convention of States is civic ritual. And I think it's a fun way to do it. You're going to meet people and build relationships and basically, be like those Minutemen coming together and for a good cause. And so host some good classes, find some Constitution coaches, use the Convention of States website to sign up as a Constitution coach. And I can promise you, if you'll do that, I'm actually going to ask for more than what Mark asked for. I'm going to ask for 2 hours a week, not 1. 2 hours a week to come together and do things like this, or maybe go testify at a school board meeting, or ask one of these legislators when they're having a hearing that you can come testify at, or maybe even just be there with a shirt on to let them know. It makes a big difference, I'm telling you. So 2 hours a week is what I would challenge you to do, at least between now and the end of the 250th. July 4th, 2026 is the beginning of the 250th. That's 80 days from right now, tonight. 80 days from right now. We'll have July 4th, we'll have our fireworks, we'll have our hot dogs, we'll have our big celebrations. But fireworks fizzle. The only reason it's going to last is because we get the intellectual training, intellectual ammunition to understand what we're celebrating. And I rattled off a big chunk of the Declaration for you tonight. Go study those actual, what do those words mean? What was the evil they were preventing and going against? Study it so that when July 4th gets here, 2026, you have a big celebration at your church or the county court, wherever you want to do it. Blow up a copy of the Declaration, have kids come forward and read through the whole thing, and then have everybody sign the Declaration. If you'll do that, there'll be a commitment then for the whole year of the 250th. So this doesn't end until July 4th, 2027. So I'm actually going to ask you to do this for a year and 80 days, that 2 hours a week you'll be involved in saving freedom. I'm actually going to ask you to give 2% of your fortune. Give more to your church, give to Convention of States, give to Patriot Academy, give to Wall Builders, give to Turning Point, whoever. Give 2% of your income. Pick a few people, a few candidates. Invest 2% of your income into good candidates. But invest in freedom 2% of your income. And then 2 times a week, post on your social media something that Mark shares or that I share or one of these other leaders in the room shares. You're literally putting your sacred honor on the line when you do that. That's your reputation. So many of you already figured out what I just said. I just asked you to give 2 hours of your life, 2% of your fortune, and 2 times a week put your sacred honor on the line. I'm asking you to do what we're going to celebrate in 80 days. I'm asking you to give of your life, your fortune, and your sacred honor, just like those men did 250 years ago. And I learned this from Mark, but I'm going to tell it before he does. When they signed that document, they did not sign and say, we pledge to the country. We pledge to the document. We pledge to these principles. No, they said in support of this declaration with a firm reliance on the protection of divine providence, we mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. Tonight, we came all the way from Texas to say to you, we pledge to you our lives. We're giving of our life right now. We're giving of our lives for 4 days to travel across Montana, flew in, going to do these events. Nobody's paying. We don't get honorariums for this. We're doing this with our own money, our own time, our own energy. When we could be with our families, doing other things, we're giving of our life to you. We're giving of our fortune to you. We're giving of our reputation, our sacred honor to you. Now we're asking you to do the same thing. 2, 2, 2 for at least 1 year and 80 days. God bless you.